piece of the communion cracker kind of caught in my throat since I took it, but I've been afraid to cough. So I'm going to try and hold out until the end of my sermon and everyone leaves before I try and get it back up. But if I do end up coughing, you'll know that that's what is causing it. And I've taken a couple drinks. But just like that, here we are, once again, in the Lord's house. And my career as a televangelist is over. In fact, it's actually pretty nice to be able to see faces again when I'm preaching instead of just staring at a little cell phone. I preached up here at the church house a couple of times, and then sometimes I did it back at home. It was way more awkward to do it here because I was just staring out at empty pews, and I did that for the Easter message and I think for the first message when this thing first happened. And I've never been one to shame people publicly from the pulpit before. But some of y'all haven't been to church in a while, and I just want to point that out. I was looking for a great message for Mother's Day, and you mothers, you fixed it for everybody. We all lucked out because otherwise, for this first message back right after our seclusion, I was going to preach on Romans 16:16, which says, "Greet one another with a holy kiss." But I guess we won't be doing that for a little while. So instead, we're going to go to Proverbs chapter 31, which should be very well known to especially the ladies, but the men should know this also. And I'm going to start in verse 10, and I'm going to read through the rest of the chapter. Now, these are the words of King Lemuel, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I did look it up, but I've already forgotten how to pronounce it. So this is something that he wrote. Most of the Proverbs, as we know, were written by Solomon, but this is from someone else, and he had something to say about women in this passage. And so that's what we're going to read today. And he says, starting in verse 10, "Who can find a worthy woman? For her price is far above rubies. The heart of her husband trusts in her. He shall have no lack of gain. She does him good and not harm all the days of her life. She seeks wool and flax and works eagerly with her hands. She is like the merchant ships. She brings her bread from afar. She rises also while it is yet night and gives food to her household and portions for her servant girls. She considers a field and buys it. With the fruit of her hands she plants a vineyard. She arms her waist with strength and makes her arms strong. She perceives that her merchandise is profitable. Her lamp doesn't go out by night. She lays her hands to the distaff, and her hands hold the spindle. She opens her arm to the poor. Yes, she extends her hands to the needy. She is not afraid of the snow for her household, for all her household are clothed with scarlet. She makes for herself carpets of tapestry. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. Her husband is respected in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. She makes linen garments and sells them, and delivers sashes to the merchant. Strength and dignity are her clothing. She laughs at the time to come. She opens her mouth with wisdom. Kind instruction is on her tongue. She looks well to the ways of her household and doesn't eat the bread of idleness. Her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also praises her. This is her husband speaking here. Many women do noble things, but you excel them all. Charm is deceitful, and beauty is vain. But a woman who fears Yahweh, she shall be praised. Give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her works praise her in the gates." Now that's a very big list of things that she did, and you can only imagine if you were to take out many of those things that King Lemuel wrote in there, just how much of a disarray the household would be if this worthy woman that he's speaking of was not there. Now, because of the last 2 months and because, we've had a lot of free time on our hands to do different things, I've tried to do different projects around the house, and I've been able to spend more time with the wife and kids and just do things that I'm not normally able to do. And one of the things that I have really enjoyed that I've been able to do that I haven't had time is to read. Normally, I only have time to read the Bible, and that's what I mainly want to read because obviously I'm preaching out of it every Sunday, so I don't really have time to read a whole lot of other books. But because of what's been going on, I've had time, and I've read several different books lately, and I've gone through them, and I've really enjoyed them. And one of them that I finally went through was one that's been on my list for a while, and I'd only read a little bit out of it, and it was a book of poetry. And if you've been on my Facebook, you've seen what some of these poems that I've actually posted on there, and it's from a Utica native. Now, this was not a book that was mass published. She self-published it herself, but there was a poem in here that she wrote, and it was back in the 40s that this was published, that I wanted to read this morning in honor of Mother's Day and kind of speak on it. And it's entitled, The Roadside Flower. And it says, I found a tiny flower growing by the road one day, and as I stopped to look at it, I couldn't help but say, why grow out here all by yourself, where all is bleak and bare? Think of the lovely gardens, filled with flowers rare, where everything is bright and gay, the whole long summer through. It seems that such a spot would be a lovely place for you. And then from somewhere came a voice, as plain could be. A lovely garden's not the place where I'd be missed, you see. But out here on the roadside, where weary ones go by, they'll appreciate the perfume of a flower small as I. I grow to cheer the sad ones as they travel by the way. And though I'm out here by myself, I'm happy every day. We're planted where we're needed most, our cheerfulness to show. And the most important thing of all is to be sure we grow. As was mentioned during the prayer time, I lost an aunt of mine a couple of days ago, and that kind of changed the course of what I decided to speak on this morning in honor of Mother's Day, because as what normally happens when you lose someone that you care about, you start thinking back on different times that you spent together and words that were spoken and times that you were able to fellowship with one another. And this is one of the poems that really made me think about her. Now, she and I, we had a pretty close relationship over the last 10, 11 years, actually, since I went out to New Mexico 11 years ago, the first time, and I was out there for a while. And anyways, we would get on the phone sometimes, and we would talk for well over an hour, sometimes an hour and a half. And so I was pretty close with her, and she was one of the ones that I would go to a lot when I had different questions or just wanted to talk, and she was filled with a lot of different wisdom. But all of this happened because of mainly one little incident that took place 11 years ago that really kind of drew me closer to her. And what that was when I first went out to New Mexico. Now, I didn't really have a whole lot of experience with her prior to this, because prior to this, she lived down in New Mexico, I lived down in Ohio. I had only seen her once or twice my entire life. Obviously, I knew who she was, but I wasn't very, very close to her. But so I moved out there, and I was staying with some other family members. And something happened while I was out there that got me all upset, and I was just ready to chuck it all away and just head back to Ohio. And I was very upset. In fact, I packed my vehicle and I was going to leave that day. I was doing it very rashly. And so she found out what I was going to do, and that I was going to leave very rashly and upset. And there was this little family controversy that was brewing, and she found out about it through someone. And so she called me that day, and she said, before you leave town, why don't you come over and sit down and have lunch with me? And so I went over to her house, and I sat down with her, and she made me a nice little lunch. She had it ready when I got over there. She was expecting me. And one thing about Jackson women, some of you have had experience with some of them, is they're very persuasive, I guess I should say, and so you kind of do what you're told when they tell you to do something. So I think she knew I was going to come over there when she called me. So she had everything ready, and I came over, and so I sat down, and she didn't try to berate me. She didn't try to tell me I was making a mistake. She just sat and listened to what I was upset about, and then after I got it off my chest, she slowly started to comfort me and to give me advice. She listened patiently to my grievances. In other words, what she was at that moment in life that I needed was a mom. She was being there for me in my time, and she wanted to make sure that the best was happening for me. And as a matter of fact, before I ended up coming back to Ohio after that, she gave me a special gift when I left, and it was a cup. And on the cup it said, "When I count my blessings, I count you twice." And her and I, we just had this special relationship ever since that time. But I want to point something out, this is where I'm going with this, and I want to point something out about her life. Now, my Aunt Ava that I'm speaking on, she wasn't living in a garden of flowers like I was mentioned in that poem, and I kind of want to describe what I'm meaning by that. She wasn't living the life that the world said that she should strive for. Now, the world tells women, well, it tells men and women, but the world tells women, and especially the past several decades, you don't need the family life. You don't need to be a mom. You don't need to have children. Go out, get a career for yourself, make a name for yourself, do these things, earn all this money, and that is what is told of us this day and age. And she could have done that. She could have had all that. In fact, when she was younger, back in the 50s, she was a model. That was the life that she first started out on, and she was very beautiful. I've seen pictures of her from back then. She could have been a very successful model for a very long time. But you know what? She ended up giving that all up, and she moved out west, and she actually spent several years up on a mountain. Now, this is not my other aunt that you guys have all met, but this aunt also went out there with those missionaries, and she went up on the side of this mountain on the Navajo reservation, and she gave up all the conveniences of life, no electricity, no telephone, nothing like that. And she lived there for several years in a bus outside of an old church, and she ministered to these people who knew nothing about Jesus Christ. So, the point of what I'm trying to say is, Aunt Ava chose to give up that lifestyle of living in the garden with all of that beauty to go off to a roadside place by herself where she could cheer the people who needed it. And after she was done on that mountain, she stayed out there out west. She stayed in New Mexico in this ugly, dirty desert that I'm sure she didn't really appreciate. And she worked with slobbering drunks and drug addicts in order to give them the hope of Jesus Christ. And she made herself available, in the story that I told you earlier, to a confused nephew that she really didn't even know that well at that time, when he needed the guidance of a mother figure. Now that is what motherhood is. And that's what I'm trying to get across with this. You see, mothers don't have to just be a mother to someone that they birthed. If you've never given birth, if you're a woman and you've never given birth to a child, you have still probably been a mother to someone, even if it was just for a moment, like Aunt Ava was to me, in their life, and it will be something that they will never forget. You see, motherhood is a denial of self. Motherhood is putting others first. Motherhood is separating yourself from the lusts and the pleasures and the glamour that you could have in this life and that the world tells you that you should seek after, and instead seeking after the well-being of others. Last week, I think it was, ever since this whole lockdown started, the days have just moved together, so it could have been 2 months ago for all I know, but I think it was last week. We went to West Virginia, Shelly and the kids and I and Dad, and I wanted to take the kids down there to see the place where Dad grew up. And so we went down there, and there was this old drive-in that's been there since the 40s, and you could still go there, even with the lockdown, and they would bring your food out to you to go once you ordered it. And so we were planning on taking it and eating the food somewhere else, and I just wanted to show the kids some of these places. And so we get to this drive-in, and we're parked there. Now, because of the virus, the bathroom was not open. You were not allowed to go in. Well, Gracie had been asleep in the back of the truck. And so Shelly goes to wake her up because we've ordered our food and we're getting ready to eat it. And when Shelly wakes her up, well, we keep a diaper on her when she's asleep and on long trips just in case. And it was a good thing we did, although it may not have really helped all that much, to be honest with you, because Gracie had a little accident. I'm not talking about liquid, I'm talking about something else. And so this accident was a pretty bad one, and it was kind of climbing up out of the diaper onto clothes, which we did not bring a spare change of clothes for Gracie. And so Shelly tells me what's going on, and I smell something, and we're about ready to have our food come out. I mean, this was just a horrible, nasty smell. And so Shelly goes And she takes her to the bed of the truck, and she puts the tailgate down, and she's trying to clean her. In the process, Gracie's wiggling, and I look over, and all down the front of Shelley's shirt, which she didn't have a change in clothes, was now this thing that was in her diaper. Well, at this point, there was nothing we could do there because they weren't going to let us into the bathroom, and we even asked them. And so Shelley's got this on her shirt, and the baby is now in nothing but another diaper, and she's actually cleaner than Shelley is at this point, and everything just smells horrible. And finally I said, you know what, we've got to go find a gas station or something. And so I told the lady, I said, we'll be back to get our food in a minute. We've got to go find a restroom that's open somewhere. And so we went down to this gas station, and I go in and I ask for the key, and I unlock the door, and we get in there, and there's no soap, and there's no paper towels. So I actually went in and bought soap and brought it back out into the bathroom, and then I let Shelley go in. And so Shelley's trying to clean Gracie up with the soap to get her a little cleaner, and then there's really nothing she can do about herself, so she just has to put a coat on to cover it up and clean herself the best that she can. And you know what I was thinking to myself when I was writing this sermon? That I'm sure that when Shelley was a little girl, looking forward to all of the great things that she was going to do in this life, that something like this little episode that took place was probably not what came to her mind as to what she was looking forward to in life. But yet she did it anyways, because she is a mom. You see, motherhood is not being angry at God. And you know, I should point out that Shelley did it very graciously. She wasn't angry at Gracie. She might have been a little bit at me for bringing her down there, but she wasn't angry at Gracie, and she did it very graciously. But you see, what I'm saying is motherhood is not being angry at God because He planted you out in the middle of a desert or beside a lonely highway, far away from the glamour and the attention of the garden that a flower might receive there. It's not being mad at God for keeping you out of the fast life and putting you in the situation like she was in the other day. But what motherhood is thanking Him that you were planted where you can do the most good for others. And that's really the Christian life in general. And this is because motherhood is a direct reflection of God Himself. You know, the Bible tells us that we're created in the image of God. In Genesis it says God created man in His own image. Now, one thing that we have to understand is the Bible was written in a very different time, and when it says man or mankind, it is referring to man and woman. It's not referring specifically to the male gender. In fact, if you keep reading in that passage, it says, in God's image He created him, male and female, He created them. So you see, God created the woman, He created the mother in His image also. Now, we like to think of God only in the masculine sense. Now, of course, when we refer to Him, we say He, we call Him Father. But there's also another aspect of God that He imparted to women. And they reveal to us that aspect of God, just like men reveal a certain aspect of God also. And Jesus Himself said the greatest example of what I'm talking about, when He left the Garden of Heaven, the place where all the glory was, and instead He grew up as a root out of dry ground, Isaiah chapter 53 says. You see, Jesus was a roadside plant also. In that chapter, Isaiah 53, it continues on to tell us that the world despised and rejected Him as a man of sorrows because of His humility. Just like for the past few decades, the mothers have been despised if that's the life that they choose. They say, well, you're not seeking enough for yourself. You see, Jesus didn't live a glamorous enough life for them. They couldn't understand how their Messiah could be so humble. Just like the world today can't understand why a mother would choose to want to get married and have children. But you know, He didn't complain that God put Him in the wrong place. Jesus never whined about any of that. Instead, He took every opportunity to cheer the weary travelers of this world, the people that He was sent for, out on the roadside where He was needed and why He was sent. You see, charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised, and if not by man, she'll be praised by God. Because a woman who fears the Lord will be doing the work of the Lord. Instead of chasing after the stars, she'll be making her hurting nephew lunch and taking time out of her day to make sure that he doesn't leave out of anger and mess up something in his life, being the mother that he needs at that moment. You know, my Aunt Ava that I mentioned to you, the night that she passed away, or the morning I guess I should say, I got a phone call around 3 a.m. our time, so it would have been around 1 a.m. their time. It was not long after she had passed away, and it woke me up, of course, to let me know what had happened, and then I went over and told Dad, and then I came back over and I laid back down in bed. I never did go back to sleep, but I laid back down in bed and I was thinking, and my phone went off, and I had a message from one of my cousins out there who's very troubled. He's been very troubled all of his life, and he's been very confused. He's a good kid. He's just got a lot of different problems, and he sent me a message, and he said, "If you're up, can you call me?" And so I got up and I went back downstairs and I called him, and he was crying. He was very upset that Aunt Ava had passed away, and he started telling me a story. He said, "You know, I haven't seen Aunt Ava in 2 years, even though he lives out there. There was a little thing that happened, and he's kind of stayed away from everyone." He said, "I hadn't seen her in 2 years," and he said, "This past Sunday, which would have been a week ago today," he said, "I decided to go out to the mission, and she was out there. And he said, I went over just to ask her how she was. And he said she refused to talk about herself. He said, but she sat me down, and she held my hand the entire time after not seeing her for 2 years and basically writing off the entire family. And she held my hand for 2 hours straight and talked to me about the Lord and how much one of her last interactions. Now, Aunt Ava, she was an artist, and that's kind of important for what I'm about to read to you, because she gave me, after that trip that I had out there, she gave me some of her memoirs. And she wrote something in her memoirs. It's very short. I'm going to read it to you this morning because it goes right along with the message that I'm trying to get across. Now, she said, we were driving down a country road, enjoying all the fall colors. She was on her way to a church in Pennsylvania, I think, to tell them a little bit about their mission experience. And she said, we were driving down a country road, enjoying all the fall colors, when I spotted a beautiful orange tree. And she makes point to say that it was perfect. And she said it was so perfect that I pointed it out to the driver and his wife because it was so symmetric and it stood out from every other tree all around it. And then she said, as we got closer, I realized that we were going to drive almost under it, and I couldn't take my eyes off of it. So as we drove very near the tree, I began to see flaws and damaged spots. There were worm-eaten leaves and brown withered leaves and nicks in the bark. But when I saw the tree as a whole, I saw none of this. I saw only its beauty and perfection. And then she continued on by saying, God takes the bad times and the good times and weaves them together to make a perfect whole if we will trust Him. And she said, when a kindergartner paints a tree, it's usually a round green spot with a brown trunk. But when an artist paints a tree, the artist knows that the dark is needed to show the light. He knows also that the tree was stepped on and bent in its youth by careless people or by animals, that it has suffered scratches and gnawing by animals and carvings by young lovers. It has been weighed down by many ice and snowstorms and buffeted by the wind and the rain. But it has also been kissed by the morning dew and caressed by the midday sun. It has grown tall and strong, while bugs and worms aided its beautiful leaves, and while birds nested in its branches. But those branches still reached for heaven and endured. The artist carefully paints the twisted trunk, which has become a thing of beauty. He paints the dark leaves underneath to show that the tree has depth and dimension. Then he highlights it to show where the sun shines on it. It takes the dark and the light leaves, the brown wrinkled ones and the bright orange ones, and even some bare branches to create that finished product. Our lives are like that. We have bad days and good days, but if we will continue to reach toward heaven and let the sun shine on us, God will make a very good thing. Trees of righteousness, the planting of the Lord, that He might be glorified. And we, like that tree, will stand out from everyone around us. You see, she stood out And she stands out in my memory from everyone around us, even though she had a rough life and she had those different things that happened to her when she was younger and all throughout her life. She stands out because she took the time to continue to reach up towards heaven and even to spend one of her last days sitting down and trying to help the hurting. Now, ladies, whether you have physically birthed a child or whether you have been barren all of your life, God has imparted to you a special beauty that reveals to the world a part of Himself, as I mentioned. You have a holy calling and a divine mission that is unique from every man in this room. We don't have the same mission that you have. Yours is different, and it's just as important. You are ordained for a work from the Creator of the universe. He placed part of Himself in you that He's trying to show to us. And you have been planted not in a garden where you will just blend into the scene, but you've been placed right where God can use you most. Now, there may have been days in your life, or may have been days as you've walked through this life where, that God has set before you that things have seemed bleak. There may have been times where careless people have stepped on you and they've bent you, or times where you've been scratched and gnawed upon, you felt, times where you've been unappreciated, or times where you've been weighed down, so to speak, by the ice and the snowstorms and buffeted by the wind and the rain. But the point of what I'm trying to say is keep reaching your branches up toward heaven, because the artist is making a portrait of beauty, a roadside flower to brighten and cheer the lost, and He's using you to reveal His heart to the world. So in closing, you're planted where you are needed most, your cheerfulness to show, and the most important thing of all is to be sure that you grow. If you would stand with us, our closing hymn this morning will be number 349.